I arrived at Elridge Hall beneath a slate-colored sky, the sort that promised a long, bitter winter before the month was out. The carriage driver, a silent and sour-faced man with a breath that stank of wet leaves, would go no farther than the iron gate. He muttered something about the house swallowing people whole, before slapping the reins and disappearing down the muddy road without a farewell. The estate rose in the distance like a memory of a fortress, its gabled roof lines jagged against the sky, surrounded by a clutch of ancient trees with withered arms. Even through my coat, I could feel the dampness clinging to everything, as if the ground itself wanted to reclaim the structure that sat atop it. I was not new to mystery, nor to tragedy, but as I approached the great front door, a thought crossed my mind. What sane man builds a house this far from salvation? My name is Nathaniel Greaves, and I am, by trade, an investigator of unexplainable matters. That is what the Boston papers called me, at least. In truth, I was once a Pinkerton detective, trained in more earthly suspicions, theft, adultery, blackmail, even murder. But after the events in Harrow's Mill, my clientele became eccentric, which is why I had been summoned here to Elridge Hall by Dr. Jonathan Elridge, a man of status, intellect, and now scandal. His wife, Margaret Elridge, had vanished from her locked bedroom 3 nights prior, locked from the inside. The windows, according to the local constable, were sealed shut. The door had to be broken down. No one saw her leave, no one heard her scream. There were no signs of struggle, no footprints in the frost outside, no evidence she had ever left the room at all. And yet she was gone. The butler, a cadaverous figure named Mr. Abelson, opened the door without a word. His eyes, pale and nearly translucent, looked at me as if I were already part of the house. "This way, sir," he murmured. The interior of the mansion was colder than outside. The walls were lined with dark wood panels and portraits so old their eyes had cracked. Dust clung to the corners like cobwebs, and though the fireplace in the main hall burned, it provided no warmth. As I followed Abelson's slow steps up the winding stair, I felt the weight of the building settle on me. The air was heavy, still, like a mausoleum. At the top of the stairs stood the door to the Rose Room, Margaret's chamber. "She was last seen alive here," Abelson said, producing an iron key. "We have not altered anything since the night of her departure." The key turned, groaning in the lock. The room smelled of rosewater and old paper. A pale dress still hung over the bedpost. The sheets were disturbed but not destroyed. A silver brush sat on the vanity. A few strands of blonde hair caught in its teeth. On the writing desk was a journal, bound in green leather. Most curiously, the window was locked from the inside. I examined the door as well. No scratches on the inside, no broken hinges, no tampering. I knelt and peered beneath the bed, then behind the curtains. Nothing. Then I opened the journal, her last entry read. "I heard her again last night. She stands by the mirror, touching my face with her fingers of ice. Jonathan doesn't believe me, but I know what I saw. I fear sleep. I fear the night. I fear the room will keep me." October 13, 1892. I closed the journal slowly. "Who is she?" I asked. "The lady in the portrait." Came a voice behind me. It was Eleanor, the housemaid, small, bird-like, older than the stairs themselves. She was holding a tray of tea that had long since gone cold. "Mrs. Elridge said the woman in the hall watches her. She whispered, said she walked at night, said she could feel her in the walls." "What woman?" She pointed to the hall outside. I followed her gesture. At the far end of the corridor hung a portrait of a woman in gray pale, sharp hide, her fingers thin and expression unreadable. Her nameplate read, "Rebecca Elridge, 1666, 1692, executed by town decree, the ancestor." Eleanor muttered. "They say she was a witch." Of course they did. Old money in New England often came with curses. This wasn't the first time I'd heard of spectral ancestors. Usually the truth was less dramatic: gas leaks, poor sleep, perhaps a cruel husband behind closed doors. But something about this painting unsettled me. Her eyes had no reflection. I'm not supposed to talk about her. Eliner said, "Dr. Elridge gets angry." She left quickly after that. I requested an audience with the doctor that evening. Dr. Jonathan Elridge was in his study, surrounded by books on the human mind, mesmerism, phrenology, hypnotic therapy. A pipe smoldered in the ashtray. He barely acknowledged me as I entered. "You've seen the room?" he asked. "Yes, it raises more questions than answers." He nodded, steepling his fingers. Margaret was not well. I tried treatments: music, fasting, even suggestion therapy. I feared she would hurt herself. "Why didn't you seek professional psychiatric help?" She refused it, said she wasn't mad, said the house was. He stood then, approached the window. I believe she had a breakdown, ran into the woods. She may have drowned in the lake. The constable is organizing a search. And yet, the door was locked from the inside. He didn't answer that. I took out her journal and laid it on his desk. She wrote that she feared the room would keep her. He turned sharply. "I don't believe in ghosts, Mr. Greaves. I believe in fractured minds." "Then tell me," I asked, "why did you nail her window shut?" A pause. "To protect her. That night I remained in the Rose Room with the journal, a candle, and a revolver under the pillow. Around midnight the temperature dropped sharply. The flame danced violently in its holder. I heard nothing at first, then a knock, not at the door, from inside the wall, 3 slow taps. Then silence. I stood, pressed my ear to the paneling. Faintly, almost too softly to hear, came a whisper. "Nathaniel." I turned, but I was alone, and when I looked back at the portrait of Margaret above the bed, I could swear the eyes were no longer hers. They were Rebecca's. The morning came gray and brittle. The sky remained as colorless as the frost that now powdered the ivy-covered walls of Elridge Hall, after a night of restless silence, broken only by the memory of whispering behind the wood. I spent the early hours reviewing Margaret's journal once more. The entries were erratic, desperate, sometimes lucid, sometimes barely legible, but a recurring image began to form, a woman she called the lady in the window, a figure who would appear in her mirror at night, whose face never remained the same. A shape that mimicked her but was not her, a watcher. By breakfast I had resolved to interview the house staff. I needed to know what Margaret had experienced before she vanished, and I needed to determine whether the haunting was madness, manipulation, or something far worse. We met again in the servants' corridor, near the back of the mansion. She was scrubbing an already clean floor with trembling hands. She saw someone in the glass. Eliner whispered. She said it copied her movements, but sometimes it didn't. Did anyone else see it? No one looked. Dr. Elridge said it was nerves, but Margaret wouldn't sleep. She'd cover the mirrors. Then one morning I found the cloth torn off, and handprints on the inside of the glass. Inside. She nodded and wiped her eyes. I told her not to stare too long. The mirrors in this house, they remember things. They don't reflect. They remember. I questioned the cook and the groundskeeper, both hesitant to speak. But after enough coaxing, they told me about a local legend, passed from housekeeper to housekeeper for over a century. It centered around Rebecca Elridge, whose portrait still glared at passers-by in the eastern corridor. According to them, she had been condemned as a witch not by Puritans, but by her own family. They claimed she was locked in her room until she starved, and afterward her presence never left the hall. She cursed the house. The groundskeeper mumbled. They say she was buried in the mirror chamber, where no light can touch the glass. I asked where that room was. He only crossed himself and said, "No one's gone there in years. It moves." By afternoon, a coach bearing a silver crest stopped at the gate. From it emerged a sharp-eyed young woman in dark riding attire, Clara Whitlow, Margaret's sister. She was composed, but her expression bore a tightness around the mouth, a quiet fury barely contained. "You're the investigator?" she asked. "Yes, Nathaniel Greaves. I'm not here for the doctor's benefit. I came for my sister. We spoke in the sunroom, a space that seemed untouched by time, but smelled faintly of mildew." Clara produced a bundle of letters, Margaret's personal correspondence from the weeks before her disappearance. "I don't care what Jonathan told you. Margaret wasn't ill, she was afraid, and he wouldn't let her leave." The letters bore the same handwriting as the journal. In them Margaret described shadows outside her window, dreams that bled into reality, and a growing suspicion that she was being watched even when the curtains were drawn. In one note she wrote, "She waits behind my eyes. I see her when I blink. Sometimes I forget which face is mine." I looked up. "Did Margaret ever mention Rebecca Elridge to you?" Clara's gaze sharpened. "She painted her. That night I asked Clara to take me to Margaret's private studio, a room locked since her disappearance. The key was hidden behind a loose brick in the hearth, a place only Clara and Margaret knew about. The studio was small and cold, a single cracked window, a broken easel, the scent of turpentine still lingered, and the walls, dozens of paintings stacked against each other, leaned crookedly in the dim light. All of them showed the same woman, a pale figure in gray, standing in woods that seemed alive. Her face was always blurred, smudged, sometimes scraped off entirely. One canvas, larger than the others, was covered in a black cloth. Clara pulled it back. The figure stood inside Elridge Hall, her hands pressed to a window, and on the other side of the glass, looking out, was Margaret. "Why would she paint this?" Clara asked, voice shaking. I could not answer, but I noticed something odd. The glass in the painting was not just reflective. It was wrong. The background in the reflection did not match the room it was supposed to mirror, as though it showed something elsewhere. That night I sat in the rose room once more, determined to witness what Margaret had. I left the mirror uncovered and lit only a single candle on the dresser. The clock struck midnight. I stared into the mirror. For the first hour, nothing, only my own tired face, the flicker of flame, the faint sound of owls outside. Then the temperature shifted, the candle guttered. My reflection stayed still. I moved. It did not. My breath misted the glass, but not the reflection. And then, slowly, she appeared behind my mirrored self, a woman in gray. Her eyes were hollow. Her mouth was open as if screaming, though no sound came. Her hands rose slowly until they were at my shoulders, hovering inches above my flesh. I turned, no one behind me. I looked back at the mirror. The woman was gone, but the impression of her fingers remained on my coat's shoulders. Later that night, a scream echoed through the house. Clara. I ran from the room to the guest quarters where she slept. The door was ajar. She was crouched on the floor, eyes wide. I saw her at the window staring at me. I checked. The window was shut, but on the outside. 3 perfect, wet handprints. How is that possible? She whispered. I did not reply. Instead, I examined the wall beneath the sill. The wood was warped, strange, knocked hollow. I fetched a lantern and tools. Behind the paneling, I found a sealed cavity, a vertical shaft between the walls. Inside it, rotted wood, bones of small animals, and at the bottom, a door, not a door into another room, a door with a mirror for its surface. The door behind the wall wasn't locked. It merely hadn't been touched for decades. Its hinges shrieked in protest as I pulled it open, revealing a narrow passage that curved downward behind the paneling. The scent that poured out was unbearable, mildew, old ash, and the unmistakable sweetness of rot. Clara covered her mouth. We descended with only one lantern between us, the stairs groaning with each careful step. The walls were raw stone, damp, the air pressed down, heavier with each footfall. At the bottom, the passage opened into a low, circular room with no windows, no furnishings, just stone walls, and at its center, a mirror taller than a man, mounted in a wrought iron frame. Its surface was black. Not the reflective black of polished glass, but matte, as though it drank in the light of the lantern without returning any. Carved into the floor were symbols neither of us recognize, spirals, eyes, crude figures locked in twisted poses. Some had been filled with candle wax, long melted into dusty pools. This is where she came, Clara whispered, where Margaret went, and no doubt remained in my mind. This was Rebecca Elridge's chapel, her shrine. And somehow it had survived 3 centuries unseen. Tucked beneath the mirror's frame, wrapped in a linen bundle, we found a leather-bound book, thick and brittle with age. The ink had faded, but the penmanship was surprisingly elegant. It was Rebecca's journal. The dates spanned from 1689 to 1692. We read it together in the drawing room, far from that cursed mirror. Her words began innocently, herbal remedies, childbirth records, prayers in Latin. But soon her tone shifted. She wrote of dreams, detailed, repeating dreams of drowning, of being buried alive, of standing on the other side of a mirror, watching herself sleep. She described being visited by her ancestors in flame and smoke, of hearing her future grandchildren calling her name from within walls, and finally the entries turned angry. They say I spoke to no one, but I have spoken to the blood inside the glass. It listens when they do not. It understands the betrayal. They will entomb me in the hall, but they forget. I am not body. I am echo. I am root. I will walk again when the blood opens the way. The final entry, let them lock the door, let them seal the room, the next one will come, she will open it, she will be my voice, I will not be alone. Beneath that line, smeared into the corner of the page, was a faint red fingerprint. Clara stared at me, visibly shaken. She believed she would return. She believed someone would bring her back. I turned to Jonathan Elridge again. He greeted me in his study, eyes sunken, hands trembling as he poured a drink. She was sick, he said when I confronted him with Margaret's paintings, her journal, and the hidden room. She wasn't sick, she was haunted. I replied. He laughed bitterly. A fashionable word for hysteria. I tried everything, Greaves, diet, rest, isolation, even mesmeric therapy. None of it worked. I placed Rebecca's journal on his desk. Did you know about this? He paled. No, I swear to you, this is the first I've seen it. Your wife was crying out for help, and you locked her in a room. She wanted to be locked in, he shouted suddenly. She begged me to, said she had to be sealed off, that she was coming through the walls. I did what she asked. I did everything I could. Then where is she now? He couldn't answer. His hand trembled as he reached for his drink. As I left, I noticed a medical ledger half, hidden under a stack of books. It listed Margaret's sessions under coded entries. Subject responds to mesmeric state, reports seeing alternate self, describes other woman as starving. Subject resists trance. Panic screams, demands no more. In the margin, one scribbled phrase. Subject believes she is being replaced. That night, Clara and I returned to the underground chamber. The mirror had changed. Its surface now shimmered faintly, like oil under moonlight, and there was something inside it, a shape pale and distant, like a silhouette pressed to frosted glass. I called out. The shape moved. Clara stepped forward, trembling. That's her. That's Margaret. She raised a hand, and the figure in the mirror did the same. Except, not quite, it was slower, reversed, like a puppet mimicking her, and its eyes. They were wrong. They weren't Margaret's. They weren't human. Suddenly the mirror cracked, a long, thin fracture down its center. Clara gasped. She's trapped. What do we do? I answered slowly, my voice dry. She's not trapped. She's becoming. I searched the archives in the town of Warfield, where the Elridges once ruled as landowners. A single preserved court record from 1692 bore Rebecca's name, not for witchcraft, but for murder. She had been accused of poisoning her own sisters, one of whom had also disappeared behind a locked door. The other was found drowned in her own bath, water black and still. No cause of death could be determined. The family had covered it up, sealed the records, buried her beneath the floor of Elridge Hall. They labeled her mad, but every 50 years since, A woman in the bloodline had either died young or gone mad herself. Margaret was the last, unless Clara was next. I returned to the mansion in haste. Clara had collapsed in her room, muttering in her sleep, her breath fogging the mirror above the mantel. Her fingers twitched in the same pattern I'd seen Margaret describe in her journal. 3 taps on the wood, then silence. When she woke, she looked through me. She's almost finished. She whispered, "She just needs one more." One more what? But Clara didn't know, or didn't say. I burned the pages of Rebecca's journal that night. I shattered one of the upstairs mirrors with a chair. Still, I felt eyes watching me from every surface. I no longer trusted my own reflection. That night, alone in my room, I recorded my notes by candlelight. The flame flickered violently once more, and the whispering returned, not from the mirror, but the floorboards, beneath my bed. A woman's voice, distant but clear. "You're too late. The door is open now." The truth was written in the margins of history, hidden beneath layers of denial, reputation, and inheritance. For generations, the Elridges had masked a legacy of disappearances, madness, and accidental deaths among their women. There was always a reason: consumption, fever, grief. But too many were buried without autopsy, and too many rooms had been nailed shut after their final breaths. Rebecca Elridge had not cursed strangers. She had cursed her own descendants, and the curse, I now believed, was not metaphorical. It was transference, a ritual, a parasitic form of immortality that required a vessel. A mirror was merely the gate. Clara began to change. She denied it, of course, but her writing changed hands. Her letters to friends in Boston were scribbled in a looping script that didn't match her own. Her appetite faded. She became transfixed by windows and by the large hallway mirror near the parlor, where she could be found for hours. Staring, then I found her diary, or what had started as a diary. The first entries were rational, structured. Notes about Margaret, thoughts on Rebecca, and questions she wanted to ask me. But over several pages it changed. The final entry was short, only 5 words: "The glass is not cold." Eleanor, the housemaid who had served this family since she was 16, was found in the eastern corridor, face up, eyes wide, mouth open in terror. No visible wound, no blood, but in her palm, clenched tightly, was a single object, a shard of mirror glass, crusted with dried blood. On the wall above her someone, or something, had scrawled 3 words in what appeared to be soot. "She walks again." The constable was called. He refused to enter the house, said his men wouldn't either. He'd seen things, he said, in the windows, heard Margaret's voice at night when he passed the gate. "The house is wrong," he muttered. "You want justice, burn it." But I needed answers. I descended alone into the stone chamber beneath the house. The mirror no longer shimmered. It was clear now, and what it showed chilled me. It reflected the room as it was 50 years ago. The walls were newly built, candles burned on the floor, and at the center stood Rebecca Elridge, cloaked in a red robe, whispering to a child I couldn't see. But when I blinked, Rebecca was no longer in the mirror. She was standing behind me. I turned quickly. No one there. But when I looked again, my reflection wasn't mine. It was Jonathan's. I found him in the attic, surrounded by burned pages, wine bottles, and unfinished chemical experiments. His eyes were hollow, his lips cracked. He hadn't slept, he hadn't eaten, they're all the same. He muttered, rocking in his chair, "Every woman in this house, they hear the whisper, they go to the mirror, and they disappear. How long have you known?" "Since I married her," he said. The first night she sleepwalked, she stood in front of the mirror and said, "She wants out." Then she turned and smiled at me, but it wasn't her smile. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" He looked at me, and in a rare moment of brutal honesty, he said, "Because I wanted to see how far it would go." That night Clara stood at the foot of my bed. I heard her again. She said, her voice flat, "She's inside now. She says thank you." I rose slowly. "Clara, you need to leave the house." She tilted her head. No, she says I'm where I belong, that I always was. I just didn't remember. Her face was pale, but her eyes shimmered strangely in the candlelight, as if reflecting things not in the room. I called her name again, louder. And for a brief instant, her expression snapped. The real Clara was still in there, buried beneath something else. Help me. She mouthed silently before collapsing into my arms. I pored over Rebecca's journal again, even the half-burned fragments I'd tried to destroy. The ritual was never written in full, only gestures and intentions. The blood must open the gate, the mirror must remember the shape, the vessel must yield without fear. It was repeated, carried down by instinct. Margaret had been close. Clara was next. There was only one chance to destroy the mirror, but to do that, we had to call her. We prepared the hallway, removed the paintings, shuttered the windows, covered all mirrors, save for one. The largest, Clara stood before it, trembling but awake. I stood beside her, blade in hand, a vial of salt in the other. She whispered, "She's watching," and I saw her, Rebecca, in the mirror, pale, cold. Her hand pressed to the glass, her mouth open in an endless scream. Clara stepped forward. Rebecca mirrored her perfectly. Then, just for a second, the mirror blinked. Rebecca did not mirror her anymore. She reached out, hand extended, and touched Clara's chest. Clara screamed. I smashed the mirror. Glass exploded into the air. The walls groaned. A terrible sound, like centuries of breath held too long, escaped from the mirror's remains. Clara collapsed. I dragged her from the hallway as the house shook. Dust fell from the rafters. Fire erupted from the hearths spontaneously. I could hear Rebecca's voice. I was almost free. Clara survived. Her eyes returned to normal. Her voice softened, but she never remembered what happened during those final days. Jonathan Elridge vanished. Some said he fled the country. Others believe he walked into the woods and never came back. I remained long enough to see the house boarded shut, but before I left I visited the ruins of the shattered mirror, now covered in a tarp, and in the pile of glass one shard still reflected a face. Not mine. The day after the mirror shattered, a thick fog settled over the valley and did not lift. The sun became a vague smear behind pale clouds, and the trees around Elridge Hall bent under a wind that never reached the ground. Inside, the house creaked with every breath, as if mourning something lost, or preparing to reclaim it. Clara slept heavily. Her body was intact, but her mind seemed to drift. Sometimes she spoke aloud, not in her voice, but in Margaret's. Once I heard her murmur a line from Rebecca's journal word for word. It wasn't over, not yet. I returned to the rose room. I hadn't stepped foot inside since the night of Clara's awakening. The bed was still made. The window still sealed. The air was dry now, dusty, but no longer frigid, it felt. Abandoned, except the wardrobe was open. I hadn't left it that way, and behind it, in the wall, something had changed. A door, a small, narrow wooden door with a handle worn smooth. It had not been there before. The paint was different. The wall behind the wardrobe had grown a door. I opened it. Beyond was a narrow hallway, pitch black, leading down at a slow, unsteady slope. The smell was unmistakable, rot, lye, and something like vinegar. This was no servant's passage. This was a place the house had hidden, and it had opened. For me, I descended with only a lantern. The walls closed around me, at times so tight I had to turn sideways. I counted 37 steps, then I stopped counting. At the bottom was a single room. No furnishings, no symbols, no altar, just a woman. She stood in the center of the space, her back to me. Her hair was blonde, her dress white, her arms bare and still. "Margaret," I said. She turned slowly. Her eyes were cloudy. Her lips moved, but no sound came. I stepped closer. She was not breathing, her skin cold. This was no living woman. This was a shell, and then I understood. Rebecca hadn't taken Margaret away. She had left her behind. In Margaret's hand was a folded page, sealed with a wax rose. I opened it. To whomever finds this, I did not vanish. I was removed, taken from my place. My body remains, but I do not. Rebecca walks in me. I cannot stop her. I can only trap her, seal the mirror, burn the hall, Do not let her pass to another. If you are reading this, she has already begun. You must finish what I could not. I backed away from the corpse. From behind me, a voice spoke, soft and dry. The room was never empty. You just weren't listening. I returned to Clara and carried her out of the house while she still slept. I poured kerosene across the floors of the east wing, the rose room, the studio, the hallway with Rebecca's portrait. I lit the fire myself. In the hearth where her journal had once burned, flames moved fast. Too fast, as if the house wanted to be destroyed now that its secret had failed to transfer. From outside I watched as the black smoke curled into the sky like a serpent. At one point, a window on the second floor shattered outward. And for the briefest moment, I saw a face in the fire, not Margaret, not Clara, Rebecca. She did not scream, she only smiled. I left Warfield with Clara. We said nothing for days. Eventually, she began to recover, though her memories were vague, as if the entire week had been a fever dream. She asked only once about Margaret, and I told her the truth. She had passed. What I did not tell her was this. One shard of the mirror remained unburned. I keep it, sealed in a box, hidden from light. Sometimes it whispers at night. Only once have I dared to look into it, and what I saw was myself, standing in the rose room, but I have not been there in weeks. I received a letter, postmarked from Venice. No return name, only a short message. She is free now, you delayed her, but she still walks. The mirror was a prison. Now she finds windows, doors, eyes. Yours, M. Attached was a sketch. The woman from the portrait, Rebecca Elridge, drawn in charcoal on the window of a train. She was smiling. Elridge Hall is no more. The land was sold to a mill, the ruins cleared. But locals say the fog never lifted from that hill, that even now, when the wind turns in spring, they can hear knocking from deep under the ground. 3 knocks, then silence.